Well, welcome to another edition of Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor. And been wanting to do veterans. It's sometimes hard to find veterans who want to tell their story, but I certainly found one today, and it's a really good story. 1982 Lagodi High School graduate. He's a retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel. Welcome, David Flynn.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so David, just to give context, because you've been gone a long way, or a long time from Lagodi. So let's talk about your family a little bit. There'll be somebody out there that knows your mom and dad, might know your family. So let's start with your parents.
Okay. Richard and Mary Ann Flynn.
Richard and Mary Ann, okay.
Mary Ann Strange was her maiden name,
Yeah.
and grew up right there on John F. Kennedy Avenue, right next to St. John's old gym high school.
Yeah.
Before the high school burnt down.
Okay, what'd they do for a living?
My mom worked for the city. She worked for the city receiving department, bills payable, water department, and things like that. And then my father worked for the state of Indiana, worked on highways and bridges, inspections and paving and things like that.
Okay. And you've got a few siblings somewhere around the area, right?
Rick, my oldest brother.
See, now Rick I'm familiar with. He was just a year behind me in school, and Rick's a great guy. I haven't seen him in a while, but
he lives over in Washington.
Yep.
He's been here for a while, works up at Crane as a contractor.
Okay.
And then I have my sister Kathy, who's up in Danville, Indiana area. And then twin brother and sister, Chris and Christine, they both live out of state. Christine lives now in Florida, and Chris lives now in Rhode Island. They both moved a number of times throughout their career after college.
Okay. Well, Christine is a regular viewer of these, and I appreciate it, but she's the one who said, hey, listen, my brother's got a pretty good story, and it is Memorial Day week, and I thought, man, I can't pass this up. So I read an article that, did the military do it? It's a day in the life. And
something similar.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who was a public affairs officer that I worked with in Iraq, he was doing some stories for some military publications, and he was writing about people that he'd served with.
Okay.
And we had served together for about 18 months, 2003 to 2005-ish time frame. And he called me up one day and said, hey, would you be interested? And I said, sure, I'm happy to help out. I mean, it's always easier to talk about yourself and what you do, but it also, I think it helps, paint the picture for different things about what people think about the military or different places we've served.
Yeah, and another reason I do this, David, is because this is something also for our community neighbors. This is preserved. It's going to be on YouTube for your family, your grandchildren, their family. So a story that they may not really have heard, at least not from you necessarily, they'll hear it from you. And it'll be there if they want to watch it 20 years from now or tomorrow or whenever it's out. So that's another reason why I enjoy doing these, kind of a part of history for the family. So I read the article, fascinating article. There's no way, and I told your sister Christine, there's no way I'm going to do his military service justice today, but we're going to do the best we can, and we'll get into it. And I guess I'll ask David, at what point did you feel in your life, did you feel like the military was your calling, and why?
It's funny because I even talked to people and my older relatives that are still with us, and they said, you were always talking about the military. You were always fascinated with the military. We had a long tradition of military service, not just in my family, but here in Lagodi. Rick and I were talking about it last week. We were up at St. John's Cemetery. We still mow our parents and other relatives' graves, put out flags and flowers, Bramble and Regelsville and different cemeteries where we have our relatives. And if you really notice, if you take the time to walk through any cemetery, not just St. John's, but the number of military markers. I mean, almost, I won't say every gravestone, but it's very symbolic for such a small town to have such a great reverence and a great sense of serving. And I was always aware of that. I mean, we would go to the different ceremonies for Memorial Day, especially.
Did your dad serve?
My dad did serve. He was in the Army, served in France and Germany, and right after the Korean War, he served. And then my Marianne, my mom's father, was in the Navy in World War II, and then two of his sons were in the Army. after that. In fact, Frank was the commander here for the Legion. I remember, again, being very young. I mean, he passed away in the 70s, 75, I think. But again, I knew that he had served in World War II and he worked in county government, but as the commander of the American Legion, I was always in awe of all these men and women when they would do these ceremonies at the cemeteries for Memorial Day, for Veterans Day. And St. John's has a very prominent veterans area. And in fact, it made me recall, and it's been, I don't know, maybe 3 or 5 years ago, because there was still a son from Lagodi that was missing in action in Korea, and they found his body through restoration in Korea and brought it back here and had ceremony and stuff. And I always remembered that one tombstone there, missing in action, and nobody there. But I knew my neighbor, a former mayor, Bill Bowling. He was in the Marine Corps in World War II.
Yeah. And Bill's brother was the mayor, Don.
Oh, Don. I'm sorry. You're right. And a number of Bill's sons were in the military. A lot of our neighbors were in the military, and even a number of my classmates, a number of the guys and gals in front of me were all in the military. A number went to the Air Force Academy. I think both of the Blad sisters went to the Air Force Academy. Phil Arvin was in. Tim Strange, Darren Goins, Mark Nycomb, Ed Canary, Jamie Waniger, Dana Strange, the retired Army colonel, living back here in town. His brother was in the Air Force. His older brother, then that was in the Air Force. His father was in the military during Vietnam and stuff. And those are just things that always sat with me. And so I was always around it. I mean, I still have, dog tags and uniforms from my grandparents and different people that served. Yeah. And it was just always something that interested me. My reading and everything.
Was there anything back then? Today there's ROTC, and I'm sure there was something back then. But was there anything back then in your formative years, whether it was high school or what have you, that you were able to get involved with that led you to the military?
I think scouting. I mean, in the day, and scouting here. I mean, again, small town. I mean, the scout troop was very prominent, both in Cub Scouts, Weeblos. Richard Klusner was our scoutmaster, and Judy, I believe, I don't want to date myself, but second grade, I believe she was our second grade math teacher. Yeah. And so it seemed like then, and I'm not positive about scouting now as far as their ties in with the military, but I mean, we did a lot of our campouts at Crane, and back again in the 60s and 70s. Crane was more of a military-based base, not necessarily a science and technology with a lot more civilians now. And, so I remember, Crane Village, and my cousins that live in North Carolina were born in Washington because, their father was in the Navy and married my aunt, and they lived in Crane Village. I remember playing basketball against Crane in 6th grade at the school. I mean, all that is long gone. I did too. You're right. But having that locally, and being such a prominent part of our area, I think Crane had a huge influence because it had a lot bigger military population then.
And isn't it amazing what Crane has grown into?
Yeah, I mean now there's probably necessarily maybe more people that work, and Crane is known around the world. It was a funny story when I started in the Marine Corps, and I was doing a monthly inventory for the Armory, and they have basically then they had. This is back in the 80s, they had, and they still may have it now, but it was called the Crane Report. And then what it was an accounting of all the small arms and stuff, because a lot of that was tracked out of Crane, Indiana, and everyone was trying to figure out what the acronym was, because the military is big on acronyms. Yeah. And we were talking one day, and it was just funny. I was like, they were saying, do you know what Crane? I was like, it's not an acronym, it's a place. It's a village, So it's a small place in southern Indiana, and it's very prominent throughout the world.
Although the acronym's ahead of it, NAD Crane,
right? Or
Depot. In SWC.
In SWC now, Naval Support Activity Crane, NSA, and different things. So
Right. Well, go back to your senior year in high school. At that point, I mean, was your pathway clear? Did you know at that point, once you graduated, you weren't going into the workforce, you were going into the military?
Correct. I was going to go to college. I thought, it was right after our mother passed away. She passed away my senior year in high school. And very set. Rick had been up at Indiana State for a couple of years,
I was up there with him.
and then I mean, I know, she was very set on us going to school, and so I had made my decision to go to school, and I was looking into ROTC possibilities and different things. Again, I think during that time, even, the military, I wouldn't say wasn't as popular. But again, Vietnam had just been over for 6 or 7 years. The draft had just stopped, even though we were still registering. Late 70s, I think, was the last draft. So, I knew I wanted to go in. My cousins and a lot of people had served in Vietnam, and we were obviously all old enough to remember those days. But I had actually I went down to Jasper, close to high school graduation, and talked to the Marine recruiter because I wanted to go in the Marine Corps. I knew that. And I talked to him, and funny story, because I ended up meeting this gentleman later in life. He told me the reason why he didn't sign me up that day was, and you don't know what you don't know. And recruiters work on, they have to put so many young men and women in a month, and it's not a quota, but they have to do throughout the year.
Yeah.
And so if they've already filled it that month, if they can delay this person to the next month, and obviously it's beneficial for their records and
Okay, a
stuff.
little paperwork, yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
and they know this person wants to go in, so he's probably not going to go away.
Yeah,
So the likelihood of them coming back is pretty good.
Okay.
I told him I'd
I didn't
already
know that.
well, I don't know what they do now. This is 1980, early 81. But I told him I was already accepted to Indiana State, and I was going to look into Navy ROTC, and he actually told me about it's called platoon leadership class. The Marine Corps doesn't have ROTC, so it's called a platoon leadership class, and you join it, and then during the summer you go to training. And if you pass, that summer, then you go back to school.
Now, when you say training, are you talking about basic training as we know it?
Basic training for officers, for officer candidates in the Marine Corps. And it was called the platoon leadership class. And there's a number of different ways to do it: 2 6-week summers, or 1 10-week summer after you graduate, or the year before you graduate. That's another way to do it. And that was a pathway to become an officer. On the reserve side, you become a reserve officer, have to serve 6 years, and that was a way in. Without ROTC, or wearing uniforms at college and stuff like this, you would do all that during the summer in Quantico, Virginia.
Yeah,
so,
Quantico, yeah.
So that's where you would go.
So you first up for 6 years. How many times during that 6 years did you say to yourself, 6 years enough? I'm heading out.
I think like any job, I think like any person, if they're
day.
honest,
Yeah.
You probably, everybody says it more than they ever care to think about, because you're frustrated for some reason, but.
Now, were you tied down at that point to your wife or future wife at that time? Or?
Yeah, we married right out of college. She graduated in the fall before I graduated in the spring.
Okay.
And
all right, so this was a joint decision.
Yep. When we got married, and she was teaching high school out there while I was at called then the basic school after commission. I mean, we had college graduation in the afternoon at Terre Haute, and then got in a car, drove to Indianapolis, commissioned that evening at a ceremony. And then your orders, within the next 3 to 4 months, you report back to Quantico to start.
That's a big day.
Yeah.
So you graduate and get commissioned in the same
day.
Wow. So your wife was all in.
Yes.
Knowing the military life.
Yep.
Obviously, you had talked about that. You probably both knew it. Did she come from a military? Who is your wife?
My wife, former Jan Gettelfinger, grew up Ireland, Indiana, right outside of Jasper.
Sure.
Her father was an educator, principal.
Any relation to the bishop?
Cousins to the bishop.
Bishop Gettelfinger.
Spent a lot of neat holidays with the bishop there in Jasper, and different discussions. A lot of good euchre player, tough euchre player.
Been a long time since I played euchre. But did she come from a military?
No. I mean, they served. I mean, they all served, but I mean, it wasn't. They served, and like a lot of people, I think, through after World War II in Korea. I mean, and then with the draft was still going on, they would serve, their time, their 2 or 4 years, and then come back home. And a lot of them would go to boot camp over at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, or down in Arkansas. or I mean, a number of places with the Army.
Right.
And but they all served in the Army.
Okay. All right. So you're married.
Mhm.
You go in.
Mhm.
She goes with you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Where do you start your life?
So yeah, I mean, we were both. I mean, she came with me to Virginia. We weren't
Quantico. Okay.
married yet. I mean, this was September, but she had to start teaching,
Yeah.
and so we got an apartment outside the base and stuff. And she was starting to teach high school there at Stafford County, and then I would start training beginning of October, and be there for 7 months in
Okay.
Quantico
Okay.
until you figured out what you were going to do in the military.
Was she able to live with you on base during that time?
During that time, I didn't live on base. I lived in
You
an
lived in-
apartment.
okay.
I mean, if we would have been married when I checked in there
Okay.
as a student, then yes, we would have
Okay.
probably been
So she's
assigned.
all in.
Yes.
At that point, did you think, okay, after 6 years, we'll see, but realistically, were you thinking after 6 years we'll start a life in some other profession?
I mean, I'm sure we talked about it. It doesn't resonate in my memory.
Okay.
To the fact I thought I would always retire or stay in as long as they would allow me to stay in.
Knowing that what family to come would be going all over the world, or at least
Yes.
all over the country for sure, right?
Yep.
And we'll talk about that,
Mhm.
I'm sure. All right. So your first assigned specialty was to serve as combat engineer officer, right, as a Marine Air Force Air Ground Task Force. Now, when I hear combat, I immediately think, oh, no. But tell me, what does that mean? Combat engineer officer, what is that?
So every branch of service has engineer officers, and different specialties. Let's say construction or road work, heavy equipment, making water, putting in electricity, doing airfield repair, and different things like that. For the Marine Corps, it's a fairly small branch of the Marine Corps, and basically, I mean, you do a lot of, you make bunkers, you make fighting positions, you emplace mines, you move them around, and then in combat,
When you say in place mines?
emplace them, and you would put them in. The Marine Corps is one of the only services that has a standing minefield detachment. We
Okay.
served down in
So you're
Gitmo.
placing mines in minefields.
Yes.
Okay. Dangerous?
Yes.
Yeah.
Marine Corps is again one of the only active duty or reserve anybody as far as the U.S. military anymore. I mean, because mines aren't used as much as they used to be, but we still have a minefield detachment in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, in defense of the naval base down there, and the Marine Corps does that with the minefield maintenance detachment, and Marine Corps combat engineers rotate down there because the mines can only stay in the ground so long. You have to take them out. You have to double check to make sure you know where they all are.
No, I didn't know that.
You have to cut. You have to cut.
So not only do you have to put it in the first time,
Yeah.
you have to go back.
Right, because they don't stay forever. I mean, they could, but they deteriorate over time, and it becomes dangerous if someone has to do something with it.
And how do you know? And I'm going to ask so many silly questions.
No, there are no.
But how do you know exactly where that mine is that you put it in, or where? I guess maybe a better question is, how do you know where to place those mines that might be strategic, that might help?
Well, in Cuba, I mean, and obviously you're taught this at at the combat engineer schooling on how to do this and how to record it, how to measure it off, your steps and your compass azimuths and different things like that. I mean, and I would say, unfortunately, nothing's an exact science, and sometimes people do get hurt over time.
Right.
But I mean, there's a standard procedure like anything in the military on how to do it.
But you were confident.
Yes.
Okay. Did your wife know what you were doing? Could you tell her what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff you could. I mean, everybody doesn't get a serve. I mean, I personally did not get a serve in Cuba, but I mean, we're all taught how to do it, and it was a very coveted spot. I mean, they rotate only 2 or 3 officers out of there in just a few years. So the chance to go when you're a lieutenant or a captain, I mean, because I mean, there aren't that many Marine Corps engineer officers, but there's enough that it stays pretty backed up that the people want to go down there for the practical experience of this.
Those first 6 years, where all were you located?
Okay. We were located in Beaufort, South Carolina, just outside of Parris Island. In fact, our first child was born there, Megan, at the Naval Hospital.
Okay.
So you have Parris Island, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and then you have the Naval Hospital there in the city of Beaufort,
Okay.
and then you have Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort that at the time had, I want to say, 6 F-18 squadrons, a support squadron, ammunition group, other support things for the aviation wing, all there in Beaufort, South Carolina. So we spent a little over 3 years there.
Okay.
And so after that, then I was assigned, this is right before Desert Shield, Desert Storm had started. So I was assigned to 9th Engineers in Okinawa, Japan, unaccompanied. The Marine Corps still does, or did at that time, unaccompanied tour where you're only going to be there for a year, so you don't bring your family over. If you want to be there for 3 years, then at that time they would move your families and stuff, and you would live on base housing.
Yeah.
But so I was sent there, and then Jan actually came back to Jasper with with daughter. She was only 6 months old at the time.
Okay.
And so out of Okinawa, then a lot of things were going on. The war was getting ready to start in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and stuff was getting a little tense in Korea. So they put a lot of Marines out of Okinawa and Japan over to Korea, just as a show, saying, hey, we can be in Iraq and we can be here too, so don't get any crazy ideas while this goes on in the Gulf.
Yeah.
And then once that kind of calmed down, then majority of us went on to Saudi Arabia for Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Yeah. So Desert Storm, 1990, early 90s,
Yep,
right?
90, 91.
So were you as a Marine, were you well ahead of us as far as, it's CNN, right?
Right.
I mean, they were on top of everything, but did you know ahead of everybody else kind of what the next step might be and when we might go in, or?
I think at some levels, obviously you have contingency planning and stuff. Then I'd only been in the Marine Corps a few years, so pretty low on the totem pole as far as I had just been selected for captain, and I was promoted ahead of schedule because of the war. So I'd still been in just a little over 4.5, 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're a lot of your things were reactionary, but you were making plans.
You didn't know
if
what,
this, then this, and
Yeah.
you had sets
So
of plans.
you didn't know what each day would hold. It might be
exactly what each day would hold.
So the bombing starts.
Mm-hmm.
What's your responsibility once the war actually starts? And where are you?
I'm in Jubail, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Okay.
And at that time, I was working with the headquarters element. I wasn't with per se a unit. And so we were doing planning and making sure the facilities that we were using in Saudi Arabia, could take all the people and make sure all the services and stuff were ready to go, and maintain them and be ready to move that kind of stuff forward in support of whatever forces move forward. And then, like you said, the bombing stopped, and then, then it was over.
Yeah.
It was over very quickly.
Yeah. What was it? 3 days?
3 days for the main part, and then there was some follow-on stuff in Kuwait with renegade units and different things like that.
Okay.
And so then you had all this stuff and everybody over there.
So when you went in, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess relative to our U.S. history, it was somewhat peacetime. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would think so.
So then you go into Desert Storm. It's 3 days or whatever, but the remnants from that, you not, were part of helping build the Iraqi military back up?
Well, that was for the second Gulf War. That was for the war on terrorism and stuff. So you had so you had Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Okay.
Right, and majority of people, very few people made it to Iraq at that time.
Yeah.
You had the Kuwait type stuff, and a lot of people went into Kuwait. But honestly, I would say the majority of people never left Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Because
they were ready, but just
didn't need them, and we had such a big coalition of forces at the time. We had, there was a UN mandate and forces from all around the world. Unlike, the second Gulf War or the war on terrorism with Iraq, where a lot of it was U.S. only for a lot of it.
Yeah. How do you handle, David, and you would see this even later on in your military life as well, and you would have your own thoughts, but um, the U.S. government decides to do whatever they decide to do. You have insight that may allow you to think it's a good idea or it's not a good idea, but it's your job.
Right.
Right. Are there conflicts there in your mind?
Not,
Never
I
ran
mean,
into.
not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's what makes a U.S. force so special. I mean, because of, number one, the education level of a normal American soldier is higher than a lot of places in the world. I mean, just because the great benefits we have in this country. It's not because people don't want to do it or gap it off. It's just, the benefits for us being an American in that respect of education and different things, we're able to achieve certain levels of education. I mean, it's offered to us. So I think the level, and I see that now that I'm older. I mean, I probably didn't understand it then at, 27, 28, even 30.
Right.
But, now that I'm, just shy of 60, and you look at it and where I've worked in the world since,
Yeah.
and the opportunities, that the normal soldiers have, and why you may have, military issues and problems with the government and the military, and it's not set up like our system. So, I mean, our system is, we defend, our Constitution. We defend the ideals of America. We're not defending a person or a political view or anything else. As long as it's a lawful, legal way of doing business. I mean, that's what we're doing based on the orders of whatever chain of command. And I don't think no one that I've ever known questions that. And I think that's why we're such a good force, such a professional force. And it's just, pleasure when you look back to serve like that and not have those worries. I mean, you don't have to worry, you can have a discussion, but at the end of the day, the people that are elected officials, and no matter what level. It doesn't have to be a military level. I mean, if you work for the city or the state or any form of government, elected officials acting within the realm of their job. I mean, people respond to that.
Right.
And that's what makes our country so great.
Yeah. So Desert Storm, were you coming to the end of your 6-year term or just had already re-upped?
Coming
Okay.
coming to the end of the 6-year term, but prior to that, we officers that didn't have what they called a regular commission go through a process of, filling out basically an application and having a number of interviews, and a lot of senior colonels and generals and stuff looking, depending on your command, like say, the Air Wing, the 2nd Marine Air Wing on the East Coast, would look at all their lieutenants who don't have a regular commission, and then basically rank them against each other, interview them, and then decide how many they're going to offer a commission to.
All right.
So you go through that process, and it's just like anything else, trying to get into like a law school, I think, or anything. It's based off, some testing and how you did in your chosen.
Okay. But at this point, you were still all in.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I'm interested along the family aspect of it. So you have this conflict that you're going to, this war, and you haven't yet gone through your 6 years, so you have an option of getting out, right?
Well, at that time you really didn't, because they had what they called stop loss.
Okay.
They weren't letting people get out of the military for Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Okay. And you're again, you have a child, just one at this point. She still has all buy-in of you moving forward and making a career out of it.
Yeah.
At that point, once 6 years is up, and you made a determination that you're going to make a career of it. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
But it's still not guaranteed at this point.
No, I know. So tell me a little bit after Desert Storm, things quiet down, but yet.
They did quiet down. One of the neat things, and it's just another tie into the whole Crane story. So when the war was over, Crane, Indiana, sent a lot of people, civilians and military people that worked at Crane, to Saudi Arabia to help repack all the ammunition to come back to the U.S. I mean, everything had to be, and we had
Yeah. I guarantee you, somebody watching right now, spend some time over there
They did, and
from Crane.
I've got to meet a lot of them. It was because I was at that time working in what they called the G4, the J4, and ammunition being part of logistics falls underneath that. And one of my jobs as an engineer at the time was, we'll call it facility engineering, and I was in charge of going to facilities, doing a survey, getting stuff fixed so we could turn this back over to the government of Saudi Arabia, stuff that we had used, that they had given us.
Okay.
Hospitals, airfields, warehouses, port facilities. I mean, just big open fields where we'd set up base camps. And
So you just occupied those areas. Now you have to
now
give
we're
them back.
cleaning them, and we have to give them, setting them back to where they would, that is acceptable to give back. Like, just, when you borrow your neighbor's, tool or lawnmower, let's say you don't send it back all with the grass still on it and everything.
Right.
Same kind of concept.
Okay.
So I was able to see and work with a lot of the people from Crane. I mean, I remember we'd sit around and talk about, we got the Lagodi Tribune, and a lot of the people were people that I knew from school or knew from the city of Lagodi, and relatives and other people. So yeah,
Small
it was
world.
very small world.
Yeah. All right. So 9/11. I know there's time in between, of course, 1990 and 9/11, but September 11th, 2001 had to alter and change. Obviously, it did the U.S. military's course, but personally, it had to change your course of action as well. Is that fair?
Very fair, and I was in a very unique position.
Do you remember how you were told? Where were you when you first heard?
So we were actually on deployment. So for the Marine Corps, we have what we call Marine Expeditionary Units. We have 3 on the East Coast, we have 3 on the West Coast, we have 1 out of Okinawa, Hawaii. And at any given time, we have 2 of these at sea around the world. 1 off the East Coast, 1 off the West Coast, and then depending on what's going on in Asia or where else, the 3rd one. And we always have 1 in training and 1 that just returned. Well, at the time of 9/11, I was on my 2nd deployment with the 24th out of Camp Lejeune. So we actually had just came out of Kosovo, had airlifted everybody back to ships, all of our equipment and stuff through the mountains in Albania and different places, some by road march, some to port, some by helo. And we were back on the ships, and we had just docked in Cyprus for we'd been in Kosovo at that time, just right at 38, 39 days. So we were back on ship, and then we were going for a port call in Cyprus. And, because of the time change and everything, we'd gotten in, and people had just had some initial, just a little bit of time off, the next day, and then started getting, radio reports and, seeing stuff on TV and CNN just like everybody else. And so, yeah, we were pretty shocked because we were forward deployed.
Yeah.
So, with the stuff, with Afghanistan and everything going, being talked about even prior to that, usually the MEUs are one of the first people to go in to a conflict for the Marine Corps.
Who would be?
The MEUs.
Okay.
It's a force. It's a task organized force, and that's what the Marine Corps and the U.S. government uses, a forward deployed force. At any place in the world. So yeah, it was shocking. Shocked. We were on ship in port in Cyprus, getting ready for some time off, and then this happened.
So you're in Cyprus. Your family's back home. All of your family back home. The plane goes into, of course, Twin Towers, Pennsylvania, Pentagon. I mean, you have to be wondering, what's next? Where is it going? Is it going to hit the Midwest? I mean, you had to be a little bit worried.
With so many planes,
about folks back home, because what is next, right?
Yeah, I mean, worried for sure. I mean, my family was at a military base. We were living in New River, North Carolina at the time, and had been there a number of years. And so, yeah, wondering what's going to happen with military bases. I mean, transportation issues. We still had time. We weren't coming back home immediately. So I mean, obviously, we were very limited to what we could do to help our families, while we were trying to plan and gear up for what may come next.
Yeah. So you just completed a mission. You're ready for some downtime. Did that downtime ever come?
No.
They came to you and said what?
Right
after 9/11.
We had to start. I mean, we called everybody back. We were there maybe 2 or 3 days because we were restocking foodstuffs and everything else, and plus just trying to get a handle on what happened and who did what. So we weren't just going to move around willy-nilly, because I mean we could take off this way and we need to be someplace else. So obviously we're going into planning, we're reworking all of our equipment and stuff. We were coming close to the end of our deployment. Usually these units are out for 6 months at a time, and then they rotate with the next one coming over we'll usually meet up in Rota, Spain, and one coming in, one going out, do a turnover, and then that's the next people in the hopper. So not knowing what was going to happen, obviously you're doing planning and getting stuff prepared. And I mean, for us, being at the end of our deployment, we turned over with the 26 MU, the one coming out. We cross-loaded some equipment, a lot of equipment, and obviously ammunition and key personnel and different things, because the 26 MU ended up going into Afghanistan as one of the first forces. So
it had to have been surreal for everybody, of course, but when you went in, of course, you remember, or if you don't remember it, of your family members or whatever, maybe in Vietnam, World War II, where they were pretty well hand-to-hand combat wars, some bombings, but you'd never seen anything like this.
No.
I mean, planes coming in to destroy buildings, to destroy people, to destroy a country. So now all of a sudden, the definition of war changes completely, right?
And it changed. Exactly. It changed again, because it had changed from what we had prepared to do for the first Gulf War. A good example of that, as the company commander in Okinawa at the time, in my company, in Alpha Company, we had 3 Vietnam vets this is 89, 90. We still had 3 guys who were young enough that had served in Vietnam at the end, and now they were master sergeants and master gunnery sergeants or warrant officers, older guys in the Marine Corps, and we hadn't been to quote war and for quite some time. And so now you go from the first Gulf War, which was, like you were saying, planes went in and stuff, but it wasn't really a ground combat type of war, and then to see what happens, like in Lebanon, it happened, in between, and Grenada and Panama, and those type of incursions. And now to see this, where, they're militarizing, civilian transportation and doing stuff unconventionally that, nobody was really prepared for.
So when you're saying the war on terrorism, this is what we're talking about. It's not conventional war. It's terrorism, and it's difficult to plan for, I'm sure. So 2003, the U.S. military invades Iraq, right? This again would change your course, wouldn't it? It seems like
it really did.
Yeah, it's amazing again, and that's my point. When you went in, it's sort of peacetime. And I remember thinking at one time, whether it really was or not, I remember thinking, I can't believe the world is at peace, when it really wasn't. There were other parts of the war maybe at each other, but the war, we were at peace, it seemed. And then, well, even today, unfortunately.
In the bigger sense, you can use the word peace or war, and but behind the scenes, there's always smaller conflicts. Let's call those. Sure. And it was, interesting. But so when I came back from the start of the war on terrorism, I come back to Camp Lejeune. The MU disbands, so we go into back to our old units or different things. I'm due orders out of Camp Lejeune. I'd been there for a number of years because I'd been with this unit, and so people were asking me what I wanted to do. I was a major. I was second in command of our unit that had been deployed. I'm going to come in zone to become a lieutenant colonel and stuff. So they're asking me, what I wanted to do, and I wanted to stay with a unit that was going to go, to, not necessarily fight, but be in support of whatever effort we were going to do.
Exactly.
And so I had got orders to work with the Saudi Marine Corps in Saudi Arabia on the West Coast. They have 2 brigades. Saudi Marines have 2 brigades, 3 battalions each, one on the East Coast in Jubail area, and then one on the West Coast in the Jeddah area. And so I was selected through the help of my senior commanders to be one of the guys selected to go over there and help train their Marine Corps in preparation. Because if you remember during the first Gulf War, Khafji, Saudi Arabia, where the Iraqis came across into Saudi Arabia in an attack, and they didn't want that to happen again. They wanted to be prepared for it. And so that's what we were helping train their Marine Corps and military for at the start of the second Gulf War.
Yeah. So you're training the Iraqi military.
Well, this time right now it's the Saudi military.
Okay.
To fight the Iraqis in case they came across. And that was, kind of ironic because once again that war, the ground war piece of our second Gulf War was over relatively quickly.
Right.
I mean, it's longer and obviously, more tedious and more
Right.
people were hurt and killed, unfortunately. But, the bigger part and was going to be the occupation and what we're going to do with Iraq after that time. And so a lot of us, once Saudi Arabia, realized that that wasn't going to happen, we maintain a training mission over there, but we don't have to have it manned up at wartime levels. So a lot of us got orders back to the States, and I was sent to New Orleans to the engineer facility office down there from camp, or when I came back from Saudi Arabia. And no sooner than I got there than the colonel that I worked for in Iraq, an infantry officer, he was assigned out of Quantico for leading a group going to Iraq to start retraining and reworking with the Iraqi army, now that we had captured the country.
Yeah.
And so he called me and said, "Hey, do you want to go?" And I said, "It's really funny, sir, because I had just gotten orders. Yeah, it's fun. I'm glad that he asked me and everything else, but he said, no, really." And he said he'd make it happen. And within a few days, I had orders from Headquarters Marine Corps that I was accepted and I was going to go on this to start working with the Iraqi army.
Mm-hmm. And again, how dangerous would you? I mean, when I think of it, especially over there, any day anything can happen. Whether it's, and this is from my perspective. Mm-hmm. It seemed like every day you'd hear people, of course, going over minefields, being blown up, maybe even by friendly enemy, friendly whatever it was.
Friendly fire.
But every day it had to be something that was dangerous. Did you feel that danger?
I did feel that danger. I mean, I still feel that danger when I do the type of work I do now.
Yeah.
But then, I don't know. I think, again, another wonderful thing about our military is the dangers inherent. Everything we do in peacetime and preparing, for war or conflict is inherently dangerous. Training is dangerous. So it wasn't something that's going to numb you and have you not act.
Yeah.
You knew it was there. You don't let it get the best of you. Yeah. The training that we do throughout our careers and stuff prepare you to handle a lot of that stress and mindset. It definitely wouldn't be easy on anybody.
Right.
But again, with the professional force and the benefit of having a force like American forces, is the majority of the people that you deal with on a daily basis, are true professionals to the core. And, you can't beat working with people like that on a day in, day out basis, regardless of the situation.
Yeah, they all have the same goal.
So, safety is always paramount, but you don't not do something because it's dangerous. You try to make it less dangerous, but at the end of the day, that still has to be completed. So,
yeah. Did you have friends, people you worked with that never made it home?
Had a number of guys, no one really exceptionally close to me, killed. A number of guys wounded, and a number of guys, that, I kept with me, for different things and ended up being wounded and stuff. Nothing, any wounded severe, but not life-threatening in a sense. A lot of our Iraqi compatriots that we helped train and stuff, their casualty rate was much higher. Again, there were more of them and they were in the thick of the fight at this point. After the war, was for their country as the insurgency started, so they took on a bigger role, and the casualty rate, for them was quite high.
So 2006, you retired from the military as lieutenant colonel.
Yes.
Take me through the stages as far as ranks are concerned to lieutenant colonel.
Okay, so you start out as a second lieutenant when you're commissioned, and then if you're lucky, you promote to first lieutenant, and then captain, which is what they still say is it's the height of the company grade realm. And this is what I was saying earlier about even though if you get the regular commission, now you're fighting for promotion to major, so once if you would reach the rank of major, then you could stay in, to a high year tenure. But if you got passed over for major and you didn't make that rank, or for the Marine Corps, for staff sergeant, from sergeant to staff sergeant, so you can stay in for 20 years if you chose to. So that's your next hurdle. So, so you second lieutenant, first lieutenant, then captain, and then major, and then lieutenant colonel, and then colonel if you would stay in and be fortunate. And each time up the ladder, you say, I mean, the number of officers they need are less. You may go from a few thousand second lieutenants to first lieutenant to captain, captain to major. May cut it down. Even more so, major to lieutenant colonel, captain to major, major to lieutenant colonel, to where colonels, for the Marine Corps, I believe, is only 600 or 700 at any one time, and general officers, and we have less than 80 in the Marine Corps. So yeah, the pyramid gets tighter up top.
Yeah, the ladder gets thinner, right? So you decide to retire in 2006, 22 years in. What went into that decision? Obviously, you were eligible. But was that even a conversation, or
I will say this, and it's one of the few times. I mean, my wife and I had talked about how long.
And how many children did you have at this point?
We had all four of ours.
Okay.
Two girls and two boys.
Okay.
And everybody's living in New Orleans. We're living at the air station.
Okay.
Belle Chase Naval Air Station, or now Joint Fighter Base, I want to say.
Okay.
It was damaged pretty much a lot in Hurricane Katrina, but luckily I had just moved the family out.
Yeah.
So we had talked about what I wanted to do, and at that time the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were still at their height, and so word came out for some volunteers for some different unit type stuff, and I volunteered, and I wasn't going to be allowed to go because basically from 2003 to 2005 I'd been there the whole time, and so now the Marine Corps does this for a reason. I mean, they train people across a wide spectrum of responsibilities. The more senior you go, the more apt eventually you're going to be. You have to do some office time and headquarters time. And there's not anything wrong with that because we need competent people in all facets. But I just came back from Iraq and I still had friends over there. And the people that they were going to be working with were people that I knew. We had a good rapport. So the transition for this new unit going over, I thought it would make it a lot easier. And I pitched my case and I was denied.
Over to Afghanistan?
To Iraq at the time. And
at the time, okay.
And from that discussion, I decided to put my retirement papers in because I was going to have to spend it, some of it selfish in the sense that I wanted to go back to units that were in the fight. And we were in two different places. Yeah. And at this time, it's only 2006. I mean, we were there for a lot more years. Yeah. And so I wanted to continue to do what I thought was my part.
Okay.
And if that wasn't going to be allowed to, then I was going to retire.
So you do retire, and you have, at this point, escaped serious injury, correct? Tell the people what happens next.
Well, initially I thought I had interviewed for a job at Crane, of all places, in expeditionary warfare. Up at Crane.
At the time living in New Orleans?
Yep. I had interviewed on the phone. I had been back here because once I put my papers in, I was back here after Katrina for a little while. We were the Marine Corps headquarters then after Katrina hit when I was down there. We were split between Texas and South Carolina. We split the headquarters to cover the East and West Coast. I mean, there's 180 plus reserve sites in the 48 states out of 50. Plus Puerto Rico that the Marine Corps Reserve takes care of, year round. Yeah. So they had split that. So I was back at home for a little bit. I interviewed for a job at Crane. They had offered me the position, but again, at the time, the government was on a hiring freeze, and so they didn't know when that was going to be lifted. So I said, okay, I didn't want to wait around. I mean, not that I was doing anything that important, but I'm just coming off active duty. I'm on what they call terminal leave. I had a lot of leave built up from serving in Iraq the 2 years I was there. And so I mean, you're still on active duty. Even if you're on terminal leave, you're still an active officer until your retirement day. And so in March of 2006, I go on what they call terminal leave, come back home. The job at Crane isn't opening up. I talked to some friends of mine that have already started working for contractors, not security contracting. I was going into a construction contracting job, rebuilding Iraqi military bases.
Okay.
So
Right up your alley.
so I was home for about 7 days in March,
Yeah.
and then I went straight back to Iraq.
Yeah. And what happened?
Well, again,
I don't mean to laugh.
I know. I was gonna say it's funny, but so for the first 4 month tour as a civilian, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that could have happened to you, but nothing bad happened.
Right.
And so I come home on my first leave for 2 weeks, and then I go back, and I'm still on active duty, so I'm home. And then when I go back right at the end of June, now I'm officially retired. As of 30 June, 1 July.
Okay.
So I get back into Iraq on the 5th of July, and then on the 28th or 29th July, then our convoys ambushed in a place called Tarmiya, and we had myself and two other guys were wounded by small arms fire.
Can you take me through that?
Ambush. We were the place in Tarmiya where we were. There was only one way into the town. On the other side of the town, there was a bridge over the river that had been taken out during the war and not rebuilt. So really, there's only one legitimate road going into the town. And so, I mean, we drove nondescript vehicles. We had our own security, not U.S. military, private security, because what we were doing, we were putting teams out to rebuild Iraqi military bases and police stations, throughout the country. And it was all under contract, under Department of Defense contracts, and Army Corps of Engineers and Engineering Command, Air Force Engineering Command out of Texas. And so we had civilians, companies in charge of this, and we would put teams of people on these bases, and then they had the security and everything else. Well, since the Iraqi Army stuff was underneath me as a program for program management, anytime we would change a team out, I would take the team out there and change them out, make sure turnover went good, and bring the old team back so they could go on leave. And so we were ambushed. We were driving out of the city, our 4 vehicles, different truck and a semi-armored car that I was in, 2 other semi-armored cars, and a bunch of people in the swamp, to our left. All of a sudden, RPGs, heavy machine gun fire, and stuff. I mean, just a truck had tried to block the road, and we had gotten around them, and so they were shooting all over the place.
And one got you.
Yep, an armor-piercing round came through. I was on the left side of the vehicle. Armor-piercing round came through and basically blew my left calf off.
Oh, is that right?
So
you were in the hospital for a period of time over there?
for just a little bit of time in Iraq.
Okay.
So first we had to drive like 50 some miles. One of the vehicles flipped over the truck and had 2 of our Iraqi mechanics that would do tire changes, and so we had jacks and tires and stuff. So that truck, an RPG had blown up in front of it, and they overcorrected, and the truck flipped over. And then so they were both wounded. The last vehicle picked them up, and then we kept going to the next U.S. military base about 50 miles away.
Were you guys firing back
No,
at this point? No,
No,
you were
we're-
just trying to get the heck out of there.
just trying to get out of there. We were armed, but again, our job was not engagement. It
Right.
was self-protection.
Right.
If we became disabled, we didn't want to stop and get in a firefight. And we weren't security contractors.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, so 22 years of service and all kinds of dangers, but nothing ever really happened. But within a month of retirement?
yeah, not even
Yeah.
20 some days,
Well,
and
the irony of
then
that.
shot.
Well.
It was a hard phone call to make. But
Yeah,
I
let's talk about that phone call.
I waited.
Did you have to make it yourself, or did somebody else make it?
Someone else made it initially,
Okay.
and then within a few hours after that, then I was able to speak to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
But
Honey,
they,
what's the...
well, they waited. I asked them to wait because I didn't know how bad
Okay.
it was going to be.
Good decision.
And so if something really bad was going to happen, I want to be able to
Yeah.
get it,
Yeah.
be off the drugs enough to talk to the doctor, and
Okay.
but things were going to be, okay, if you can call it okay.
Okay.
And so I was in Iraq for about a week at different military hospitals, and I've flown to the military hospital in Germany, which was interesting because, again, with our services, the reserve and the National Guard and different people, they rotate specialties and stuff out, for their active duty service. And the military medical services, we have a lot of reserve units and stuff like colleges and, because obviously, they're learning to be doctors and nurses. And so a lot of these cities have, medical detachments. And it just so happened that a number of people that were working at the military hospital in Germany were all out of the Air Guard unit in Terre Haute, Indiana. And I went to Indiana State.
Yeah.
A lot of them were ISU students. Now all of a sudden, you got an ISU guy there. And so it was, much like the crane thing, a small world. And it made the next 3 or 4 weeks go a lot easier for me in the hospital in Germany.
So in the 17 years since, I know you've been all over the world since then. Ever go back to Iraq?
Yeah, I've been back. I mean,
the contractor's role takes you back?
Yep, it takes me back. Has taken me back. Now for the last 14 years, I've been working almost predominantly in Africa. But
yeah, what do you do in Africa?
Still, we do government contracting. Not in a construction field. What we do now, or the companies that I work for and have since about 2009 and 10, is we work with different companies to reconfigure systems. We'll call it that. And what that means is, everybody has a military system or a security system or how they do business in their military. And we work with their leadership, like say they have a problem with recruiting or finances or training or life cycle management of equipment or facility planning or whatever the case may be, training, how to take care of people that get hurt, or like our system, we take care of people who get hurt while they're on active duty or deceased, like Memorial Day. You're taking care of that family. And so we go in and help them try to get more out of the system they have, and something that's going to be, again, we work in dangerous parts of the world, so it has to be politically smart for them. For them it has to be culturally, it has to be religiously, it has to be financially. You have to take all this into consideration with the recommendations you're giving them about the longevity of this program. They can't just willy-nilly because somebody wants to do it this way, say the Chinese or the Americans or the French or whoever. We're there to support them and help them, but it's got to be something that's sustainable, or it's just we call it a self-licking ice cream cone. It doesn't get any. It's better for a while, but then your ice cream's gone, and then you don't have anything.
Are these contractors based at Crane?
No, they could be. I won't say they're based, like the companies that I work for historically. There's been 3, and 2 of them are based out of Virginia and one's based out of Texas. And then depending on the contracts, whether they're Department of State or Department of Defense, or even possibly for that country director through the United Nations or something, they need something done somewhere for a certain amount of time. And then we put a team together and go do it. Usually it's retired, probably some senior military, and definitely people with combat experience and different things. And then, but also not necessarily, there's some civilians and stuff, because some of the stuff that they need help with, that's why our system is successful. We have civilian oversight. The military doesn't operate in a vacuum. We work, like we were talking about earlier, for elected officials. And the civilian aspect of our system, is superior to what you see around the world. And that's why it works. It isn't one system controlling the other. It's oversight and support of each.
So you're basically on call at any time, right? So outside of that, when you're not on call, are you able to live the retired life?
Some.
You're in Jasper, right?
Yeah, in Jasper, and like today when we were both able to go to kindergarten graduation at Ireland.
Yeah, well, so we haven't. I really didn't know you. You were 3 years younger than me. I knew the Flynns, and you didn't know me. But yet here we are, after we agree to have a discussion, we find out that we're going to be at the same kindergarten graduation in Ireland, Indiana, because our granddaughters are graduating kindergarten. Way to go, Lila and Rosalind, by the way. When you say some, though, so tomorrow, are you retired? Are you working? What?
I mean,
You don't know.
still working.
Okay.
I mean, Jan, she teaches still
Yeah.
at the middle school in
In Jasper.
Jasper.
Yeah.
She's a math teacher,
Yeah.
and probably still will do that for.
Yeah.
She hasn't decided how many more years that'll be.
See, she'll have my grandson next year.
There
Yeah.
you go. And so, um, fortunate, for where we live. I mean, majority of our family. I'm up here at Lagodi quite a bit. There's still a number of Flynns that live here. All my first cousins, and a lot of my mom's cousins on the Strange, O'Malley, Toole side of the house. We still do family reunions at Bramble Conservation Club
Yeah.
in West Boggs Park.
But let me say this: he's not so much familiar with Lagodi that he knows where the library or the St. Vincent de Paul is. I call him up and I said, "Yeah, let's do this interview at the library. You know where that is?" I said, "Hey, and it's not on North Line Street anymore." I know. He says it's in the old Matthias's building, right? No. They moved next to St. Vincent de Paul. Do you know where that is? Yeah, I know where that is. Don't they have a Mexican restaurant on the corner there? You don't know where it is. So things have changed a little bit around
It
here.
has changed, and a lot of it's good. And I've been fortunate twice since I've been out of the military to work up at Crane for some very good contract organizations. So living in Jasper enables me to drive through Lagodi both ways every day, and I've spent a lot of time talking to reacquainting myself. Get to go to some of the basketball games, some of the things up at the KSC or at the VFW, which what used to be the Red and White store.
Right,
I think that was my brother Rick's first job.
I remember Rick working there. Rick always worked. I never remember a day when Rick didn't work. Right?
That's true.
He was there, was at Mueller's here in
Yep.
town, right, and in Washington, and now he's at Crane, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, tell me about your family. You talked about Jan, teacher, right? Your kids?
Yep.
What do they do?
So they've all graduated college, and my daughters are the oldest, Megan and Madison. They both live in Jasper and work for Jasper Group. They're in Jasper, have for a number of years now. Both their husbands, one's local, Travis Huffman, married to Megan, and they have three children. So that's three of my grandchildren. And then Madison married a guy she had dated in college in Indiana State, like Jan and I. So obviously we spoil them because they're Indiana State grads, and same kind of setup. He's from Terre Haute, and so they live in Jasper, getting ready next week to have their second child.
Wow.
So that'll be our fifth grandchild. My sons, Michael and Mitchell. Michael works for a dish network out west in Colorado, lives in Denver now for a number of years. And Mitchell works up in Indianapolis with some high finance groups, and they're all successful and happy, and we're very fortunate, again, because of, like we talked about, education opportunities, the opportunities they got to travel around a number of places within the country, the ability to study overseas once they were in college and things, all those things, that are open to, us as Americans, we're able to capitalize on.
And where do they wind up? Some of them right here in Jasper, Indiana.
Exactly.
That might be Denver, might be Indy. But,
true, but they all come home. I mean, they all come home for reunions. In fact, we're having our first strange family reunion. It'll be in Nashville, but in July, where a lot of my cousins and aunts and uncles on my mom's side, we're all getting together.
So 22 years of service. I mean, we can't go through everything. I know there's so much more, but anything that I didn't talk about, we didn't talk about, that stands out that you think might be interesting either to these people or maybe it's your own family who don't know?
The thing, I mean, like we talked about being Americans and stuff, and it's evident with our country that, we have a lot of benefits that others don't. And I think it's really, I mean, obviously, as you get older, you realize how much more there is and how fortunate we are.
Right.
And you don't take advantage of it when you're younger because you know everything then, and then you don't know what you don't know. So, U.S. military, I mean, I loved every aspect of it. I mean, there's no other place in my mind that I'm aware of where you can travel, get the responsibility, the educational benefits of both in the service and for what they make available after the service for a future in a civilian life, and to maintain, that stuff, both for the community or for the, county, the state, the city, the country. Um, I mean, I think the travel is one of the biggest aspects. And when I spoke with Ann Ackerman, she had did an article back a number of years ago. And, it's just, you don't know, you're a small town, you say small town boy,
Yeah.
but I've been fortunate. I've been to over 120 countries in the world. I mean, both um, in the military as a contractor working. I mean, able to go on and see these on a vacation status, for some of them, nicer ones. And, to see that and to be so ingrained into the cultures, because again, the work I've been doing now, 12 years in Africa or more, I mean, you know, so many countries, and, you're not living in a hotel. I mean, you're living out doing this stuff with them, on their same type of culture, same type of hardships.
Yeah.
And I think that for me made it a good transition out of the military, because what I did in Saudi Arabia and Iraq and stuff with foreign militaries, in the Republic of Georgia, in different places with the 24th View, in the Ukraine, and training other militaries and working with other militaries and other governments to not just show them that, I mean, everybody says American, but I mean, no one outside of us really know what that is and what it means and what it takes to do that type of, to be that, everybody wants to be one, but who wants to do the hard work to make it happen? And not just individually, but collectively as a society, as a country. We speak of education, our politics, and everything else, and everybody's role. And who wants to get that in depth? I mean, so people don't know. They want what Americans have, but do they want to do what it takes and what it's taken us 200 plus years, to accomplish and be where we're at today, even with faults?
Yep. Sounds like a recruiting pitch.
Well, it is. Again, the good thing about the draft, I mean, yes, people register for the draft, but you don't get drafted. And so, again, most of the people in the military, I would say, 99.98% are there because they want to be there.
Volunteer.
So you're already going to have a step up on a professional force. I mean, the military is not for everybody. And I mean, our country is huge. I mean, millions of people. So
not for everybody, but there's enough room for
whoever wants to join. And you can make something out of that. Even if you stay just for a couple of years, if you do your whole time in the Guard and Reserve, if you're on active duty, for a full career, I mean, you would be better off for it if you decide to go that route. There's no setback.
So you can't imagine your life without being in the military.
I mean, gosh knows what kind of trouble I would have gotten into. I mean,
were you a trouble kid?
I was probably more trouble than I needed to be.
Yeah, well.
And unfortunately, but again, different times and things.
Absolutely.
But I apologize for anybody. I may have done something negative too, because
that's a whole different show.
Well, it is. But when you're young, like you said, you don't know what you don't know, and obviously you would do some things different. And I mean, Lagodi was such a great place.
But it's obvious you're proud of the work you've done, and we have to be proud of you. Marine Corps retired Lieutenant Colonel Chris David Flynn.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Well, thanks for coming. I mean, this was, and Christina, thank you so much, because, like I said, I always want to get a veteran's perspective, but it's just not that easy, not as easy as I thought. People may not want to talk so much about it. People may not have had the longevity, that you do. And when Christina came to me and said, hey, Memorial Day is coming up. I know it's not Veterans Day, but still, it's a great way, I think, to have an awareness of all the veterans, right?
It is.
And, you're around, you talked about Gary Love, right? Yeah. Gary Love is another Lagodi High School graduate. We talk about recruiting.
Yeah, he was a recruiter.
Yeah, he's in Jasper Island area as well.
He is.
Yeah, it's such a small world, but I appreciate you. Very short notice too. Coming on.
Thank you.
And it was great meeting you.
It was fantastic. Yeah. Christine called me. I had just gotten back from Uganda. Now going on 2 weeks. I'd been gone for a while.
Yeah,
but it was fantastic. I was glad you called me. And if there's anything I can do for anybody, I'm happy to help out.
All right. David Flynn, thanks so much.
Thanks, Greg.
Well, that's your Memorial Day, or at least one of them. We'll see what else we can do. But just kind of a spotlight on a veteran, and a veteran that happened to have quite a story, David Flynn. Thanks so much for watching.